delighted to be here in the building or the town where Austrian economics really began. I'll be talking about defending the undefendable, gold, and 100% banking, and I'll do it in reverse order. I'll start with 100% banking, then go to gold, and then do a little bit about defending the undefendable. What's going on with 100% banking and fractional reserve banking? Suppose Mr. A has $100 and he brings it to the bank. The bank then gives him a demand deposit for $100. Then the bank, keeping a fraction of 10%, lends out $90 to Mr. C, Mr. B is the bank. And notice that we go from having $100 in circulation, all of a sudden we have $190 in circulation, which is a problem because goods and services haven't increased, but the money has increased. The money supply or the money stock has increased, which means that everyone else's dollar is worth less, which means we have inflation, which means that we have problems. Now, people like Larry White and George Selgin and other people who say that this is a good thing say, well, you know, it's voluntary. There's an agreement. Let's suppose everyone understands everything about this, although we can doubt that given the ignorance of the public, but let's just assume that. But it's not true that just because there's agreement that it's a legitimate contract. For example, I can negotiate with Jesus to kill Hans Hoppe. This is an illegitimate contract, even though Jesus and I have agreed. I'll give him 10,000, bump off Hans, and you know, but that's an illegitimate contract. So agreement is not sufficient. Similarly, if I agree to sell someone a square circle, this is an invalid contract because there is no such thing as a square circle. So just because you have agreement does not suffice to make it a legitimate activity. There are problems with this. The instantaneous debts of the bank are greater than its instantaneous assets. It now owes $190 and only has $10. And of course, the process isn't complete because the 90 will lend out 81, etc., with a 10% reserve. There's also a conflict in rights. And one of the essences of private property rights is that we are clear as to what we can each do with our property. Now, it's true that if Mr. A and Mr. C both don't come to the bank and demand their money, the problem will not be manifest. But still it's a problem because there's a conflict in rights. They each have a right to 190 and there's only 10 in the bank. So this is pretty incompatible with the libertarian notion. Another objection that White and Selgin and others would make is that, well, it's really a loan, it's not a bailment. Well, if it's really a loan, why don't you call it a loan? Why don't you call it a time deposit? Or better yet, why don't you call it a lottery ticket? Because lottery tickets are okay, and there is legitimate lottery tickets. For example, there are fractional reserve parking lots where there's only, say, 500 spots and they sell 1,500 permits to go there. Well, it's just a fishing license or a lottery ticket. That's okay, but why don't they call it that? They don't call it that. They call it a demand deposit, which makes it highly problematic. Also, what about bank run laws? Right now, it's illegitimate to question the veracity of a fractional reserve bank. It's called libel or slander or something, and there are laws actually against promoting bank runs. Well, if the system is so viable, why do you need that? Now, this is very frustrating. To me, it's very clear, especially after reading Jesus Huerta de Soto's book, a magnificent opus on this. I mean, it should be clear to everyone. And yet, Larry White and George Selgin are not only very bright guys, but they're solid libertarians in many other ways. Why do we have this problem? Well, there are lots of libertarian disputes, and I've made a list of them, and if I haven't got them all, please come up to me afterward and give me the ones I'm missing. But here's a list that I have where austro-libertarians disagree on things: immigration, abortion, voluntary slavery. Do you have a right to sell yourself into slavery? As distinct from real slavery, coercive slavery, which of course we have no disputes over. Borrow short and lend long. There's now a dispute between two very young, brilliant scholars, Baggis and Houghton, between them versus me and my co-author Bill Barnett. Then there's counterfeiting counterfeit money, which I'll get to later. Anarchy versus limited government. The triangle as a depiction of Austrian business cycle theory. Mises never used it. Barnett and I have an attack on it, whereas Rothbard, Hayek, Garrison, and pretty much everyone else has used the triangle, triangle, triangle. When I first mentioned this to Roger Garrison, he said, triangles yesterday, triangles today, triangles tomorrow, triangles forever. This is a takeoff on segregation forever in joke. Another one is Salerno's great work on the dehomogenization of Mises and Hayek. Is this verbal terrorism or is this a legitimate distinction? Then another dispute is Hans Hoppe's argument ethics, argument from argument. Then there's the question of, was the contribution of these people positive or negative for liberty? Coase, Buchanan, Tullock, Friedman. Then, of course, there are other disputes, not within the Austrian camp, but within the libertarian broader camp. What about Austrian business cycle theory, indifference, public goods, externalities, market failure, antitrust? So there are lots of disputes, and I'm hoping that some young scholar one day will settle this for us, but the problem is that the young scholars of yesterday haven't really done it, so who knows? It's sort of a mystery, though. I mean, the fractional reserve banking is so clear to us, and it's so clear to them, and yet we're at loggerheads, and I'm not sure what the solution is. So I'll go to my second topic, gold. Actually, we don't really favor the gold standard. The gold standard is just a shorthand for what we favor. What we favor is free market money. Free market money means that people can use any item that they want as an intermediation of trade because of the double coincidence of wants and the problems with barter. The reason we call it the gold standard for short is because whenever people were free to choose, which is the name of one of Milton Friedman's TV shows or TV films, whenever people were free to choose, they always chose gold. Sometimes silver, but pretty much it was gold. Why? Well, it was portable, recognizable, you couldn't counterfeit, it was soft, so you could, malleable, you could move it around a little bit. You could make change in it, whereas if you break a diamond in two, you lose, I think, 3/4 of the value, whereas you break up a gold bar or a gold coin, you don't lose anything. It was valuable, which is why cement wouldn't be a good money. It's durable. Bananas aren't good money because they're not durable. So we had the gold standard, and the gold standard was good, and the gold standard was very good because it handcuffed government. Government couldn't create more money, which has all sorts of difficulties. If you look at the period 1815 to 1913 versus 1914 to the present, roughly 100 years on either side of the Fed, the creation of the Fed, and you look at the business cycle before and after, it's horrendously different. And the earlier period wasn't a pure system because we didn't have 100% backed gold, but we had a lot of gold in the system. So why are there free market opponents of gold? For example, Mundell, a Nobel Prize winner, is a opponent of gold. Hayek favored the ducat instead of the gold standard. Milton Friedman, I remember attending Mont Pelerin Society meetings where he would just call us gold bugs with derision and hatred, you know, you were monstrous gold bugs. Alan Greenspan, when Alan Greenspan was a young man, he was very good on gold. He was as good as gold. He wrote wonderful articles under the influence of Ayn Rand about how great gold was. And when he first took over the Fed, I said, whoop-de-doo, this is great. Because I expected the Fed to end in about a week. Guess what? Somehow it changed. I guess he grew. You know, when you go to Washington, you grow in stature, you grow in brain power. He must have grown because he now sees, you know, fiat currency is the greatest thing. Well, there are several hypotheses about this. One hypothesis is that these people are really not free enterprisers. Mundell, Hayek, Friedman, and Greenspan. Another one is, Murray Rothbard used to have this thing, every dog gets one bite, everyone should have one deviation. So maybe they are libertarians, they just have this one problem. But unfortunately, that's not true, because Murray has another aphorism, namely, everyone specializes in what they're horrible in. So Milton Friedman is very good on minimum wage, free trade, rent control, medical licensure. And what does he focus on instead? Money. And educational vouchers, which is sort of socialist policy. Is gold a good investment? Well, I trust Bernanke. I trust Bernanke to keep creating money. Because if there's one thing he thinks he's learned, a la Milton Friedman's analysis of the 1930s depression, is that we must not allow any deflation. Deflation is the worst horror that you can have. So he's going to keep pumping up money, which means that the price of gold in terms of money will rise. However, we have Franklin Delano Obama, who might follow Franklin Delano Roosevelt's policy of prohibiting gold. And if he does that, well, then the price of gold, the prognostication is not that good. So I think Austrians, as praxeologists, don't make predictions. As thymologists, we do. And I think the problem is, will Obama prohibit gold? And I don't know any way, any element of economics which will shed light on that. Okay, let me move to my third topic, Defending the Undefendable. This is a book that I wrote in 1976, or rather was published in 1976. How did I start writing this? The way I started writing this, I was getting my PhD at Columbia, and I was doing my dissertation on rent control. And it started out fun, you know, rent control is evil, and shortages, and this and that and the other. But then the whole thing turned into one exercise in econometrics. You know, how to get the regressions right, and the t-values, and the observations, and the data. And boy, was it boring. It was just horrible. So in order to rev myself up, I said, well, if I do one more regression, I'll give myself one whole day where I can do whatever I want. And whatever I wanted was I'd write about what a great guy the pimp was or something. I don't know why the pimp, but you know, if you're into econometrics with rent control, you can understand why that would happen, or why blackmail is good, or the libel or slander or any of that stuff. So by the time I got my PhD, I had about 35 essays about how great this guy was and how great that guy was, and that was the book. So it was sort of a way of pumping myself up, and you know, it was just a horrible experience doing econometrics. It sort of soured me forever. So what I'm going to do now is look at some of the entries in the finance section, because this conference is focused on finance, so I figured those would be the most relevant. And in the finance section, I've got the counterfeiter of counterfeit money, the miser, the inheritor, the moneylender, and the non-contributor to charity. I'll leave the counterfeiter of counterfeit money to the end because that's the most controversial. Okay, so what's happening with the miser? He's first on my list in this section. Well, the miser or the money hoarder is evil because, you know, Keynes doesn't like it. Money won't help the economy. But we all are hoarders. I mean, we've all got money in our wallets. I've got dollar bills here, and I've got some euros, so I'm a hoarder. Am I too much of a hoarder? Well, what's the objective criteria for hoarding? How much should I be allowed to hoard before Keynes and the Keynesians will get on my case? It's very subjective. All hoarding means is that somebody is holding more cash balances than someone else thinks he should be. But there's no criteria for how much you should be holding in the form of cash balances. Charles Dickens wrote The Christmas Carol, Scrooge, Ebenezer. This is just support of socialism and fascism. If you define socialism as government ownership of the means of production, and fascism, not so much ownership, but regulation and control, that's what Dickens was promoting, dirigisme, government intervention. And somehow every school child is taught that, you know, the Scrooge goes through these dreams, and we learn to be nice guys. Well, except for Ayn Rand, it's hard to know where are our novels, where are our folk songs, where are our movies. There are a few. Greed is Good with Gordon Gekko, even though that was Wall Street. It wasn't purposeful that way, but it turned out that way. Keynes hated saving and hoarding. He didn't realize that if you're going to have investment, if you want more wealth, you have to have investment, but if before you can have investment, you have to have savings. He didn't realize that if you want to have production and consumption, the production has to come first. You can't go to an empty island and start consuming. First they have to produce. I know it's very basic, but it's the truth. My favorite hoarder is Scrooge McDuck from the comic books. You know, he's a duck, quacks, and he throws money over his head and it dribbles down. He goes, ooh, you know, that. When I grow up, I want to be like Scrooge McDuck. Hoarding increases the value, the real balances of other people. It increases because the more you hoard or the more you hold cash balances out, the lower prices will be compared to what they would otherwise have been had you not done that, which means that everyone else's cash balances are worth more. So you should be a hero. You should be considered a hero, not a villain. Another argument against hoarding is that it's sterile, it doesn't earn interest. Well, then why hoard? Why do people do it? There must be some benefit, otherwise they wouldn't do it. Well, convenience, precautionary motive that Keynes focused on. So the hoarder is a hero. All of the chapters in Defending the Undefendable are heroic because they persevere in doing things that are good for the economy or good for people, even though they're under great attack. The next one is the inheritor, person who inherits money. Well, this is supposed to be evil because you don't deserve it. You don't deserve to receive the money. But the donor who earned the money honestly surely has the right to dispose of the money in whatever way he thinks is reasonable. So even if you don't deserve it in some way, you deserve it on the basis that he has property rights and he can donate it to whoever he wants. Yes, there is a danger that you can spoil your kids if you give them too much money. You have to be careful, but certainly no law against it is justified. And by the way, if you people are worried about giving money to your kids because you'll spoil them, I've got a suggestion for you. Leave the money to the Mises Institute. I guarantee you won't spoil them. Or the way you'll spoil them is they'll have more conferences like this, more books, more scholarships for students. That'll be the sort of spoiling that you'll get from the Mises Institute inheritance. James Buchanan, who is no free enterpriser despite the fact that he's thought to be one, favored 100% inheritance tax. Can you imagine that? I mean, okay, if he was a socialist or a fascist or known to be, he is, but if he were known to be, this would be par for the course, but he's supposedly a free enterpriser, which really bugs me. And on a personal basis, I once was foolish enough to invite him to be a guest lecturer at Loyola University. And at one of the seminars, he just said as if it was, oh, it's raining or the sun is out, oh, Austrianism is a cult. And I promised myself before that I wouldn't attack him on anything because he and I disagree, but I couldn't let this one pass, and I went into a 5-minute discussion of why we are not a cult. And I thought he would say something in response, and we'd, sort of get it on intellectually, just intellectually. He didn't say a word in response, so it was sort of frustrating. But this seems to be the view of most mainstream leading economists, that Mises and Hayek were a bunch of cultists. Well, why just money? Why not love and care and reading children books and being nice to children? Why shouldn't we tax that too? Because is it fair that some people come from homes where there's love and caring and education, and other people come from homes where there's not? Surely we can't allow that because it would be unfair. Why not, the genetic endowment? Some people are follically challenged. Others are not. Is that fair? No. I mean, surely the government's got to step in there and, right these wrongs, a la Buchanan. Is it fair that some people have an IQ of 150 and other people have an IQ of 50? If we had a machine that could forcibly transfer IQ points from one to another, according to this, you put two people in the box, one has 150, the other has 50, and they come out both with 100 IQ, and isn't that fair? Well, this seems to be the logical implication, because why just money? If you want to do a reductio ad absurdum of these things, you have to translate into other things as well, like IQ points or love or care or education. Inheritance is just a death gift. Well, what about all other gifts? We shouldn't allow people to give gifts to each other at their birthday or Christmas, because this is just a way around the inheritance tax. So we have to stop all gifts if we're consistent. Again, this would be bad enough if it was promoted by anyone else, but when a person who supposedly favors free enterprise, then people will say, well, even Buchanan favors this, so you're a Neanderthal for not going along with the program. Okay, the next one is the moneylender, Shakespeare, the merchant of Venice, the pawnbroker. Jesus Christ supposedly changed the moneylenders out of the temple, and this is supposedly a case where it shows that money lending is no good. Well, there is some revisionism on this. First of all, one revisionism is that money lending, even if it's legitimate, doesn't belong in a temple. But my favorite revisionism comes from Jesus Huerta de Soto, who says that what they were doing is they were lending fractional reserve banknotes. And that's why it chased them out of the temple. To me, this is just magnificent. I mean, if the book only had that one thing in it, it would be well worth the price of admission. It's got a few other pages in there, too. One or two other pages. A very thin book. Of course, if you're in a fight with somebody, you hit somebody over the head with that book, that person is in trouble. But this is magnificent. When I first read that, I practically fell on the floor laughing. It was magnificent. Yeah, that's why Jesus chased them out. Well, they say that, if it's prohibited, if money lending is prohibited because they charge too much interest to the poor, well, then the mafia will take over, just like with sex or drugs, and the interest rate will even be higher. The reason that they charge the poor more interest is because there's less of a chance of collecting, so you have a risk premium in there. It's very similar with why are prices higher for groceries in the inner city? Well, the crime rate is higher in the inner city. The profits are the same. If the profits were much higher in the inner city because they're exploiting the poor, well, then capital would come into the inner city. But you don't see that. So the implication is that the profits tend to equalize at zero in equilibrium, which we never reach, but there's always a move toward equilibration. Well, look, if you can lend furniture, you can lend dishes, you can lend cars, as in car rentals, you can lend houses, as in rentals, you can lend people a lawnmower. Why can't you lend people money? What's the craziness behind that? Okay, the next one is the non-contributor to charity. Charity is fine. It should be legal. I'm not against it. I engage in it myself. I've advocated using charity or donations for the Mises Institute. But an interesting question comes up. Who did more for society? Bill Gates, Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, Ray Kroc, the creator of McDonald's on the one hand, or people like Mother Teresa? Even expanded, many Mother Teresas. Well, when you put it that way, it's not clear that Mother Teresa did more for society. Yes, she was benevolent, but Adam Smith said it's not from benevolence that the butcher and the baker and the candlestick maker give us their products. It's out of a keen appreciation of self-interest. If you want some problem addressed, it behooves us to mobilize all human emotions in favor of it, not just benevolence, but self-interest as well. So, another way to look at this is, has Bill Gates made more of a contribution when he was an entrepreneur or now as a philanthropist? Well, as a philanthropist, he seems to be involving himself in all sorts of left-wing kinds of politically correct charities. Maybe he's doing some good, I'm not sure. But I know that when he made zillions of dollars, every time he sold a computer for $500, the person who bought that computer at $500 valued it at more than $500, otherwise why would he have bought it? So every time he got richer, he enriched other people. Whereas in the non-market way of getting rich, you get rich by pushing other people down. So the market is rather benevolent here. I would insist, though, that charity and markets together make the voluntary sector. So charity is part of the market system or the voluntary system. And it's not government and charity versus the market, it's rather charity and markets versus government. Okay, let me now get into counterfeit money. Now, we all know that counterfeiting real money would be illegitimate. It would be fraud. It would be similar to fractional reserve banking of increasing the money. But the question comes up, well, what about the fiat currency that we now have, which is a counterfeit of gold? Is it okay to counterfeit that kind of money? Well, I wrote this chapter, came out in -- and nobody ever commented on it. Well, there were left-wing critics who were always saying, well, this is evil and it's bad. And the London Times Literary Supplement came out with a review of the book and said that the only good thing about the book were the cartoons. I didn't do the cartoons. They were good cartoons, but everything else was horrible. Well, recently, we have a little cottage industry of counterfeit money. We have two of the leading young economists, Matt Mackay from Poland and Bob Murphy, a U.S. Two brilliant economists, have written articles criticizing this. There's this woman, Laura Davidson, who is maybe even more remarkable in the sense that she doesn't have a PhD, she never took any economics courses, she's an airline pilot, she's a woman, which is unusual in these cases because there are very few women, unfortunately, in our movement. So here we have three people who are criticizing the counterfeiting of counterfeit money, not from the usual leftist perspective, but from within our camp, if you could put it that way. So what's going on here? Why am I saying that counterfeit money is legitimate? Well, my analogy is stealing from a thief. Suppose you have A, the honest man, and B, the criminal who steals his wallet. And now C comes along, and C liberates, steals from B, and now C has got the wallet. Was this second activity a legitimate one or not, according to libertarian principles? Well, I say it is. Because if the wallet is to be returned to Mr. A, it has to be part of a two-part series. The first part is C has to take it from B, and the second part is C has to give it to A. Right? I mean, if the wallet is to be returned to A, C's first got to grab it from B. Well, if you have a two-part series, which we call legitimate, then each and every part of it has to be legitimate. Two wrongs can't make a right. So both parts have to be legitimate. C returning it to A is uncontroversially legitimate, but taking it from B has to be legitimate. Look, suppose we had this mental experiment where we said that every time a bad B for bad, takes the wallet from A, the rightful owner, immediately, like that, Mr. C comes along and takes it from him. What would happen? Well, pragmatically, there'd be no theft. Everyone would realize that it's silly to steal anything, because as soon as you steal something, the good guy will come along and grab it. So it has to be legitimate to steal from a thief. Indeed, we shouldn't even call it stealing from a thief. We should call it liberating. One of my favorite characters in Atlas Shrugged is Ragnar Danishkold, the pirate, who would attack government ships. And it was clear in the context that the government was a thief, and it was legitimate to attack. Okay, well now, what I'm trying to do is use an analogy here between counterfeiting and liberating. So again, gold is legitimate money, and what the government did is it counterfeited. Well, how about if we counterfeit money? Is this not a way of undermining the system? If we want to get rid of the fiat currency, one way, now this is not a legal way, and I'm certainly not advocating breaking the law, God forbid, we don't want to go to jail, but I'm just trying to pursue whether it's compatible with libertarianism or not and leave it up to individuals as to what they do. Well, my claim is, controversially, that it would be legitimate to do that. Now, Mackay, Murphy, and Davidson criticized me on the grounds, well, if you do that, as you just said in your analysis of fractional reserve banking, won't this reduce the value of everyone else's currency? Yes, it will. And here I call upon Murray Rothbard, who calls for the repudiation of government debt, which is a very controversial point that Murray makes. He says that if you lend the government money, your innocence isn't so clear, and the government has a right to repudiate, or if a new group comes in and takes over the government, and they repudiate your debt, they're not violating your rights. Well, what I'm saying is that if you use fiat currency, there's an analogy between using fiat currency on the one hand and lending government money on the other hand. My time is up. Thanks for your attention. It's great being here.